Hello everyone, Hamer back with another Mission Impossible episode review as we are winding down the reviews of the original series. And this time I'm reviewing Season 7, Episode 19, which is called Speed. So this one starts out with a panorama view of San Francisco, where the episode takes place. A truck pulls into a chemical plant and the driver pulls a gun out on the security guard, forcing him to open the gate. The men in the truck start pumping white powder into it. One of them calls a man named Sam Hibbing, telling him that they've got the stuff, and in the truck they tell us that the powder is actually amphetamine, commonly known as speed. Jim gets instructions in a rail yard. The mission: find and recover the stolen drugs and put Sam Hibbing out of business. In the apartment scene, we get a glimpse of Margaret, Sam's daughter, who is a motorcycle enthusiast and also happens to be a speed addict, who knows all about her father's business and has a love-hate relationship with him. Willie manages to get into the Hibbing garage and mess with Margaret's bike, while she verbally spars with Sam's right-hand man, Fred Snelling, and heads out for a ride. Barney comes into the picture as a contact from New Orleans, visiting a man named Dayton, who is one of Sam Hibbing's buyers. Dayton tells Barney that the only way to get any product right now is to be the high bidder at Sam's auction. Barney says he'll think about fronting the money for it. Later they do come to a deal. Casey puts on a Margaret mask. Jim presses a button, causing Mark's bike to conk out, knocking her out with the standard issue ring to the neck, allowing Casey to remove the kink in the bike and take her place, driving crazily outside the hotel where Sam is concluding a business deal. Sam and his associate Phelan chase her up and down the hills of San Francisco, where police assisting the IMF get into the chase, and an accident is staged where it appears that Casey, as Margaret, is hurt. Sam takes some pills off of her to avoid any trouble with the cops, and takes his time coming to the hospital to see her, more concerned about the fact that she might talk to the police and with her well-being. When he gets there, Jim's in the room, and he says that he's a counselor named John Brady who wants to help Margaret get clean. Jim leaves and Phelan follows him but loses him at the elevator, from which a really shady guy named Zinc emerges, going to Margaret's room, but he leaves quickly when he sees Sam there. Phelan manages to track Jim to an airfield where he learns about Zinc's presence at the hospital from Willie, quickly heads back. Once Sam leaves, Zinc heads in and sees that Casey, as Margaret, is okay, getting upset that she doesn't feel like having a makeout session and offering some pills to get her in the mood. Casey, of course, still isn't interested in either, saying that Sam has threatened to put her away. So Zinc decides to leave, but he wants the money she promised him, which she doesn't have, but says she'll give it to him tomorrow when she gets out. He demands she call someone and get it now, as Jim arrives. Zinc punches him and manages to escape out the elevator before Jim can catch him. Jim confronts the real Margaret, who's at an actual sanitarium, about Zinc. She refuses to tell him anything. Jim and Casey continue their plan by returning to the Hibbing home, with Zinc watching from a car nearby, and Casey, as Margaret, seems to be somewhat contrite and humbled by the accident. Sam tells her that he's happy that she seems better and has changed overall, but warns her to continue to keep her mouth shut. Phelan checks out Jim's office at the airfield and is confronted by Willie, who says he's Jim's pilot and is owed a lot of back pay. Willie also mentions that Jim, as John, spent 10 years in jail for murder, and Phelan reports the information back to Sam. The drug auction takes place at Hibbing's house with Barney and Dalton in attendance, and they make the high bid, saying they'd like to take delivery now for a potential discount, but Sam promises delivery the next morning, which Snelling is charged to oversee. Barney signals Casey, who calls Snelling, saying that maybe he should come over because Barney's trying to cut him out of the action, and then maybe the two of them can spend some time together. Snelling does indeed come over, assuring Sam that he can take care of the arrangements, no need to do anything out of the ordinary, and then heading up to Margaret's room, where she signals Jim, who comes to the front door. Phelan tells him to get lost, but suddenly wild noises are heard upstairs, and Casey, as Margaret, starts wildly flailing around like a dervish. Jim discovers some pills in the room, and Casey says that she got them from Snelling, who denies it, of course. Jim violently attacks Snelling, giving him a quick inject shot that makes him appear dead. Jim begs for Sam's help to avoid being turned into the police, and Sam makes the obvious request to have Jim take care of Snelling's body and deliver the drugs immediately. Zinc infiltrates the house, as he's done many times before, and gets up to Margaret's room, asking for his cash and wondering what the deal is with Jim and the dead guy that just got carted out. He's also, of course, in the mood for love, and in trying to put the moves on Casey, rips off part of the Margaret mask. Sam enters the room, telling Zinc to leave, but Zinc says that Margaret isn't who she appears to be, and rips the mask off, revealing Casey, whose stunt double pushes Zinc and jumps out the window. Sam tells Zinc to find her, but Casey manages to hide. Sam, of course, decides business is more important, so leaves to head to a warehouse to keep tabs on his shipment. Pulls out a gun on Jim as he figures he must be a cop. Barney and Willie arrive and shoot Sam and Phelan in the shoulders, of course, and save the day. Sam is indicted, and the real Margaret thanks Jim for not having to be afraid anymore, whatever that means. Mission accomplished. Before I go to the grade, I just want to throw out some notes about this episode. In terms of the season overall, this is actually the first episode that was shot of season 7. And it's interesting from the point of view that this is an episode that does have Linda Day George in it. She has very, very minimal involvement. Casey is technically in the episode for quite a bit, but she's played by Jenny Sullivan, wearing a mask, not as Linda Day George. This is a point, as I think I've mentioned before, where Linda Day George was very, very heavily pregnant. And you can see that she's always shown just from the neck up. This episode, in case you're wondering, was also followed by the episodes 2000, Underground, and Leona in terms of the production schedule. Those were the 4 episodes that were produced at the very beginning. You'll also note that those were the 4 episodes that featured Greg Morris having a mustache. According to the Mission Impossible dossier, I read that it was just a thing that Greg Morris wanted to experiment with. Don't read anything more into that than, meets the eye. Then, after that, Linda Day George took her sabbatical, basically, and that's where Barbara Anderson stepped in. So, kind of strange to me why, given that this was the first one shot, that they delayed the actual airing of the episode for so long. The other episodes that I mentioned, 2000, Underground, Leona, were in the first smattering of episodes that were kind of interspersed with the Barbara Anderson episodes. So that's, I'm just throwing that out there, basically. Moving on to discussing this episode specifically, I'm going to give this episode a grade of D. It's basically on the strength of Jenny Sullivan's performance in this episode. There's really not anything else that I can say that is notable here in terms of anything that is good. The basics are covered in terms of, the regular teamwork being good. It's a very low degree of difficulty, run-of-the-mill cookie-cutter episode in terms of the plot, I would say. Taking down underworld drug distributors is now becoming standard fare for the IMF. So there's nothing new here. And other than the work that Jenny Sullivan does as Margaret and Casey as Margaret, there's really, really nothing new here. Side note, I'll mention this. Jenny Sullivan is the daughter of Barry Sullivan, who you might remember from the season 1 episode, the finale of that season actually, called The Psychic. So I'll just throw that out there. Speaking of Jenny Sullivan and the Margaret character, Margaret is an interesting incidental character. The obvious callback here is to last season's episode Encounter. I gave that episode a very, very high grade. I gave it an A+. In my thoughts, in my Excel spreadsheet, may have to temper that a little bit. I do think it was a really, really excellent episode. A+, border of A. We'll see how that shakes out. This is nowhere near as good a script, nor would I say that Jenny Sullivan's performance is even close to Elizabeth Ashley's performance in that episode. Now, I can't blame the actress for that. I can't blame Jenny for that at all. She doesn't have a whole heck of a lot to work with here. And I think I'll discuss more about that when we get to the bad. Not her fault. It does remind me, though, that in Encounter, the actual mission seemed almost secondary to the far more interesting subplot related to the incidental character. And that's part of what I mean, to kind of seg into that, into the things that were not so good. The reason Jenny Sullivan doesn't have a whole heck of a lot to work with is because, unlike an Encounter, where the writers and producers really doubled down on the Lois Stoner subplot because it was so much more interesting and kind of pushed the actual main mission off to the side, that's why that episode worked so well. Here, I think that they tried a little bit because, there is a lot of Margaret in this episode, but it just seems a lot more half-hearted. The writers are not really pushing it the way it needed to be pushed. I don't know how much better that would have made the episode, but definitely giving it that kind of not so full-hearted effort. That's really the difference here. I hope what I'm saying is making sense. Other things that are not good. This episode is really plotty. In the beginning, there's a lot of unnecessary dialogue. Casey gives us a whole psychoanalysis of Margaret and her relationship with her father and why she's rebellious and all of that kind of thing. I don't think that was really necessary. It seems more like they're giving the character of Margaret a lot of informed characteristics by telling us stuff rather than letting us kind of see it for ourselves. That's followed by a scene of Margaret, the real Margaret, talking to Fred Snelling all about her dad and what's going on, and daddy sells drugs, and I like drugs, and this and that and this and that. So I guess the writers are saying, okay, now we're hearing it from Margaret herself, and that should normally be a good thing, right? Okay, yes, I agree that it's better than having somebody else talk about it, but again, we're still just talking about it instead of kind of seeing action unfold. I didn't think that was a very good use of time. And that kind of sets the tone for this episode, where it's kind of neither here nor there. We don't get a good mix of the main mission and the subplot regarding the incidental character. So it doesn't start out well, and it just kind of coasts and goes a little bit downhill from there. Also not good. The car motorcycle chase scene through the streets of San Francisco. Visually, it might look kind of neat. It was, from what I understand, it was a pretty common trope of episodes, of this genre, police shows and things like that, and other dramas, detective shows. Very, very common. But again, it's just there to fill time. And that just shows that the episode was a little bit thin in terms of real action. Also not good. Claude Akins as Sam Hibbing is a lame schmuck. The Sam Hibbing character is completely a lame schmuck. He certainly leans towards the unengaging side to me. He's definitely unlikable. That unlikable doesn't necessarily mean unengaging. But I find him to be both. I don't really care about this guy. And maybe if I cared a little bit more about Sam Hibbing, then Margaret Hibbing might have had more to work with here in this episode, and it might have been a little bit more interesting. I don't know whether I would say that Claude Akins was miscast in this episode. He had more of a career as kind of a bit of a comedic actor, kind of this bumbling personality. And I remember that he was in the show called The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo. That actually came much after this series. It started in 1979, whereas this episode is from 1973. So he's not quite there yet in terms of having that, being pigeonholed with that kind of character in his repertoire. But he just doesn't do anything for me here. So I don't know whether it's just not good casting or what, but he doesn't work as an IMF villain. And as I've mentioned before, this show is not for everybody. Moving on to the other character that bears discussion here. This guy, Zinc, played by Jesse Vint, who is actually a very, very prolific actor. He's got a long list of credits on IMDb. I was shocked when I found that. In this particular one, he wins an award, which I didn't think was going to happen. Back in the episode from last season, Mindbend, if you remember that one, I said that the character played by Leonard Fry in that episode, the doctor in that episode, had the most punchable face ever on this show. Jesse Vint as Zinc, he surpasses that. He wins the award. Boy, this guy is just really, really, really annoying. Again, that's the character. Says nothing about Jesse Vint as an actor. That's the role that he was that's the role he was given. He's doing a fine job, but man, that character, oh my gosh, I really, really want to punch this guy every time he's on the screen. I would normally say that this character is just completely bad and brings the episode down, but not really. I don't like the character, but this episode desperately needed some kind of wild card to give it any kind of momentum from a plot standpoint. I don't think it was great. I don't think it was a fantastic wild card. I don't think it did a lot for the episode, but I can't say that it was a detraction. And the only reason I can't say that it was a detraction is because there's just nothing else in this episode to detract from. You know, it wasn't bad just because there was no bad to fall down to from that plot standpoint. Plain and simple. The last point I'll make is, especially given that this episode comes right, or in terms of air date, comes right after the episode called The Fighter. This is 2 episodes in a row where we have a daughter as an incidental character. Somehow at the end, we have a scene where the daughter's character shows that she's somehow kind of a little bit better off now that the IMF has taken care of her dad and put him away, and now, you know, the healing process can begin, or some such. And again, we have another dad character who's way more concerned about himself than his daughter, and maybe that's part of where, you know, some of the dad's problems stem from. You know, it's never really explored. I don't know, maybe that was something about why the producers decided to air these episodes back to back. No idea. Maybe that's what they did. I do feel that in the previous episode, The Fighter, Paul Mitchell, played by William Wyndham, was a little bit more sympathetic. You know, he seemed a little bit more contrite and at least was willing to admit that, you know, he knew what he was doing was wrong and didn't want to take it any further than it had already gone, but he was in too deep sort of thing, whereas Sam Hibbing is wholly apologetic for what he does and how he goes about it. I don't know. I don't have a whole heck of a lot of time for such characters. I don't really find them too interesting. I find them bothersome, frankly. And I think I'm going to leave this at that. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. We've got 3 left. We're coming down to the home stretch here. And all I can ask, as always, please like this episode review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments as we wind this down. And soon I will get into the revival series. Very, very much looking forward to that. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.